Yep.
You said you would do it.
I know.
False sense of security.
I apologize. God bless Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. Today we will be talking about some combination of these things. We'll see how far we get, but if the audience wants to go into one a little bit more, then we'll just do that. So, who is Lando? If you don't know, Lando is the baddest mustache in the Outer Rim territories. He is a Tabana gas miner. Sorry, this is for a different presentation, I think. What is Lando? That is a question that I want to answer. Okay, what is Lando? Lando is a local development and DevOps tool. The high-level idea around Lando is I commit some configuration file to my project, my website. It has all the dependencies that I need to develop this website. That includes the technology stack to run the website, the versions of those things that I need, and further, all the development tools that I need to run that site. So that includes things like Drush for a Drupal site. It could include your node dependencies. And the idea is that if I have all of that defined, I can git clone my site down, as all of us do for the good devs. I can run Lando start, and then I can get my entire site running with all the tools that I need with this one command. This is the dream of Lando, and this is what we think is a good idea. So there are many things beyond just that Lando provides. So Lando is built on top of Docker Compose, which is a container orchestration layer that is built on top of Docker. Lando is actually 2 layers of abstraction above that layer. If you have people use Docker Compose for things at all, right? Excellent. Docker Compose is a great tool. However, over time, it can become unwieldy, especially for a project that has lots of dependencies. So Lando seeks to solve the complexity of managing these files by reducing the things that you need to define to the most important things, or the things that we think are most important. This means, what version of PHP am I running for my site? What versions of Node am I running for my site? Where is my site? What tools do I need for my site? As opposed to what is my DNS? What is my networking? What are my environmental variables? The things that are a little bit less fun to configure over time. Lando also is a build and automation tool. So you can do things like, after I pull my database, clear my Drush cache. You can do things like, after I start my site, install Vim as my text editor, if you're a fan of that. You can do things like, after I start my site, compile my Sass. So it is more than just a local development tool. It is a DevOps tool. It is an automation tool, a build tool. It has nice integrations with Pantheon. So if you're somebody who uses Pantheon as their hosting, you can very easily run a single command and get your entire Pantheon site built locally, which is very nice. We have the exact same, we have the closest thing that you can get to Pantheon that is not Pantheon running locally, which is very good. Production parity is nice to have. You can eliminate the works on my computer excuse, which if you have not heard yet, you will undoubtedly hear at some point in your life. Lando is also cross-platform. So if you are a Windows dev or a Linux dev or a Mac OS dev, you can use the Lando. The caveat to that is if you are a Windows dev, you do need to have Windows 10 Professional or above. The reason for that is because Docker for Windows requires this thing called Hyper-V, which is a virtualization layer. And you need to have that for Lando to work. All in all, you can think about Lando as a local development dependency management tool. Similarly to something like Composer or your package.json for Node, you define the things you need for your local development, and Lando spins them up for you with a single command. So, as I was mentioning earlier, this is sort of the layers of how Lando works. Fundamentally, it is Linux behind the scenes because we're running Docker. Then there are containers, then there is Docker, and then there is Docker Compose, and then there is Lando. So there are many things working to make the dream possible, which is interesting. Lots of tech. So Lando supports these 6 core languages out of the box. The most relevant ones to us today are going to be PHP and possibly Node as well if you're a front-end developer. But if you are a Go, Ruby, Python, or .NET developer, you can also use Lando. This is very nice because increasingly web agencies are doing more than just a single technology stack. And it's nice to have a local development tool that you can use on all of the things that you do. You can use it on your Node projects. You can use it on your static site generator. You can use it on your Drupal project. You can use it on your WordPress project. You can use it on your .NET project, because I know all of you have .NET projects. On top of these 6 languages, Lando also has these configurable and swap. I have tied myself up in the power line here. Sorry, that was almost very dangerous. Lando also offers these, I think that is 18-ish. Can I do math? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 18. 18 configurable and swappable services that you can add in any sort of configuration you want to all of your projects. So you can say something like, I want Lando to spin me up a basic Drupal 7 site. And by that, I mean the infrastructure that I need to run a Drupal 7 site, the tools that I need to run a Drupal 7 site. But then maybe I want to add a Varnish front-end cache on top of it. Maybe I want to add a Solr index. Maybe I want to add 17 MySQL databases. These things are possible. This is one of the things that makes Lando nice. You can have lots of different configurations on a per project basis. Project A can be running PHP 7.1 with Nginx and Postgres. Project B can be running Node 10 with a Elasticsearch backend. All the things are possible. Lando also has these things called recipes. Recipes are sort of our out-of-the-box configuration ideas for people that fit into these sort of categories. So if you don't know anything about what I just said about all those services, you can write a 2-line config file that just says, give me the things that I need for Laravel. Give me the things that I need for Joomla. Give me the things that I need for WordPress. Give me the things that I need for Backdrop or Drupal. And what that means is we will take the recommended settings from Drupal. It's right from the Drupal.org website. We'll give you Apache. We'll give you the PHP version that they recommend. We'll give you the Drush version that they recommend for your Drupal version. We will do all these things for you. You will not have to configure any of the things that you saw on the previous step. So the idea is the batteries are included. If you wish to accept our opinions and recommendations, you can do so. If you think that our opinions are stupid, then 1, F you. But 2, you can change them. You can go in and you can configure them in any way that you wish. Yes, Matt?
Question about that.
Sure.
Can you start with a recipe and then override certain parts of the recipe?
Yes. Yes, and that's the example that we will do.
Okay.
So you can start with a recipe and you can say, I want just the stock Drupal 8 recipe, but I also want to change the PHP version. I also want to use Postgres instead of MySQL. I also want to add a Node front end. I want to add an additional database because I'm doing a migration. And I want to add Varnish because I'm testing some cookie madness. So you can do many things. And you could actually because Docker Compose is a thing that's being used behind the scenes, if you actually want to set Docker Compose specific configuration, you can do that in your lando.yaml file too. So you can drill down from a 2-line config file that is just the name of your application and the recipe to this customization layer that we have on Lando, all the way down to do these Docker Compose things. So very, very flexible. You can have all the power of Docker Compose available to you if you wish, or you can have none of it if you think looking at that makes you sick, which does to me. So one of the great questions that we have quite a bit is who is using Lando? Why should I use it? When we started the Lando project a year ago, our expectations for it were fairly low. We had started the Kalabox project before that, and we sort of knew what the metrics were like for that. So this is a graph of usage over the last 3 years. This purple-ish magenta thing down here, these are old Kalabox users. And this magenta, this red maroon color is Lando usage. So we were thinking that we would be here, and we are definitely up here now. So there are many people using Lando. And the reason why I mention this, 1 is to gloat in front of you because I'm very proud of this, and 2 because this means that we have actually established a community. So if you go to our Lando Slack channel, there are 500 people in there. They will help you out. They will answer your questions. If you go to our GitHub issue queue, there are many people talking about issues. It's a very active project. And this is good because if you're a developer and you're using a free and open source tool, your expectation for these things might be fairly low, but it's nice to know that you can come to Lando and someone will help you. It might not be us directly, but there are other people in the community who will help answer your question or help you work through your problem. So the core thing about your the core thing that decides all the things that I just said is this .lando.yaml file. If you're somebody who has used a continuous integration solution like Travis or Circle CI or Tugboat or Probo, or if you're a platform.sh user and you're familiar with their configuration file, the Lando configuration file looks very, very similar to those configuration files. So many of these things you all have seen. I guess is that sort of readable?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
We can read it.
So this is a very simple yet valid lando.yaml file. This basically says I want to name my application my site, and I wish to spin up a LAMP stack with the default recommendations. So we can do that. If we were to start a project with this, if we were to create a lando.yaml file, and we will do that soon, and drop it into our project, the root directory of our Git repository, this would spin up a Apache server running, I think, the latest version of PHP, the latest version of MySQL, and Composer as our tool to manage our dependencies, and I think some nice import utilities for databases and that sort of thing. So very easy to just get a basic LAMP stack running. Behind the scenes, this is going to generate a series of Docker Compose files for you that are significantly longer than this is. So if you like things that are significantly long and difficult to understand, you can do the Docker Compose thing. If you like this, maybe that's also good. So if you, as Matt asked earlier, can I start with a recipe and override it? The answer to that is yes. The easiest way to do that is to specify a sort of config variable like this. And you can go in here and say, yeah, this is good, but like my project's sort of old, so I'm... Is this like a... Oh, that's fine. My project is sort of old, so I need this old version of PHP. I am like a savvy developer, so I'm putting my web root is actually in a nested directory called web, and I need the specific version of MariaDB because I want to use the open source one. I don't want to use the MySQL one. So this is the first sort of level of overrides that you can do for Lando. I want to change my PHP version. I want to change my web directory. I want to change my database. So not too complicated. You could spin up. You could use this and get what you need. You could change it to this. You could run Lando rebuild, and when it was done, you would have switched the PHP version. You would have switched the location of your web directory. You would have switched your database backend. Very good. You can go further into the crazy if you wish. So let's examine this override file. So this says, great, this is good. I've gotten super far. I have a basic LAMP stack. It's running the PHP version that I need. It's running it from the web directory that I need. It has the database version that I want. But I want to do some extra stuff now. I want to also add this node service. So do people use like NVM or RVM, these like Ruby management and node management things? Do you enjoy your experience with those things? Good. Neither do I. One of the nice things about Lando is I can say, okay, in this project, I need this version of Node. And that's nice because once I add this to my repository, it means that all my developers have this version of Node. I don't have to install a bunch of extra stuff on my computer. I don't have to remember to NVM whatever version I need when I go into a specific project. I know that it's in this repository, and I know it will not change unless somebody submits a pull request that hasn't changed this version. And once that happens, people can review it. It's transparent. All that is very nice. So you can get these versions locked down on a per project basis, and this is very good. This will save you many headaches. And it will also keep your computer nice and clean, which is also very nice. So this says, great, I have a LAMP stack, I have the version that I need, and I also will have a node container running node 6.10, and also install, I want to use gulp as my task runner, which is lame, by the way. You should just use node script straight up. But I want to use gulp as my task runner. I want the latest version. Install that for me as well. And then I want to define a tooling route, which means when I run Lando gulp, it should run gulp. So this is very good. When this happens, we should have three containers that have spun up. We should have PHP running on Apache. We should have a node container running node 6.10. We should have a MariaDB container running version 10.0. And that's good. And that will run our project. You also have noticed that there's this events layer that you can do, which is very nice. So obviously you'll have a more useful event than just printing out party in the USA. But you can say, hey, after my app starts, do these things. So you can think of more relevant examples like compile my SAS, import my database, these kinds of things. So you can script a whole bunch of stuff. And this is very nice because while you can create a README for your project that has lots of descriptions of what the developer should do, relying on the developer to read this README and stay up to date with it is, shall we say, not the best strategy many times. So you can take a lot of the things you would normally put into a README, like here's the steps that you need to run to get your site running, and instead of having them in documentation, have them in this Lando file, and that's nice because the Lando file will actually do those things for you. It will not require the developer to do extra steps. And this is very nice, especially if you have complicated projects and you're onboarding new developers who are not familiar with how the site runs. You can actually have Lando automate all those things. So the developer, no matter what project they do, they should be able to git clone the project, run Lando start, and get their site running. No extra steps are needed.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, Matt.
Quick question. If this is too far off topic, let me know. You called the node service CLI colon.
Yeah.
Is the CLI is that a keyword or is that?
Yeah. So great question. This is completely arbitrary. I could call this Kanye. I could call this Matt Westgate container. So this is just how you want to identify this particular service. The real important thing is the type.
Okay.
So I could change this to. So one example that I've done in the past is say you're developing a PHP command line utility. You can spin up just a straight up PHP container. So I could switch this to just PHP 7.2, rebuild the Lando application. I would still have a container called CLI, but it would be a PHP container now, not a node container.
And now does CLI become the host name of that service?
Yes.
Okay.
Among other host names, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do, one of the nice things that Lando does as well is Docker networking is a little bit difficult to do if you're sort of DIYing it. So Lando will network all of your containers together, and by default, Docker will give you host names that match up with the name of the service itself. But we will also give you nice human-readable names. So I think you'd be able to access this container or any of the other containers at like mysite or service name.mysite.internal.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Yeah. So good question. That's also one of the nice things that Lando does is this networking thing, which is good. Especially if you're testing so one of the nice things about Lando is you can do like a decoupled Drupal application using Lando. And if you have that sort of situation, networking is very important. If you have your front end talking to your back end, so it's nice to have that sort of out of the box. So let's just do a little demo. Maybe not. Let's talk about installing Lando. This will not be a very complicated section. Oops, that link is actually incorrect. But you can go to our GitHub page, which is so for reasons that are unclear to me, the Lando organization namespace was taken by somebody but not being actively used. So I emailed the nice people at GitHub and said, hey, man, can I have this namespace? And they were like, sure. So that was pretty cool because when we started this project, I was like, there's no way that this namespace will be available, but sure enough, it was. But if you go to GitHub, github.com/lando/lando, and go to our releases section, you can see a whole bunch of packages that you can download, various Linux packages. So if you're a Arch Linux user, there's a Pacman. If you're a Debian person, there's a dev package. But if you're a Mac user or a Windows user, there's a .exe and a .tmg. If you download the package and double-click on it and follow the prompts, you will install Lando. If you do that and you are not successful, then maybe Lando is not the thing for you. It is very easy to do it. It is basically a one-click install sort of scenario. If you are unclear whether your computer can run Lando or should run Lando, we have this great documentation page, docs.devwithlando.io. And there's an entire section called System Requirements. So I would definitely read this before you install it. I know that I say this and none of you will actually do that, but I have to say it. You should look at this, and if your computer does not meet the criteria in here, then Lando is maybe not the best solution for you. It is important to realize that Lando is essentially a platform as a service running on your computer, so it is a resource-intensive thing. So if you have a MacBook or a computer from 2006, that has like 1 GB of RAM, this might not be the best thing for you to use. So let's go back to demoing a site. So we saw that basic example earlier. I'm going to make the same apology that I made in my training yesterday. I have been convinced, I think unwisely, by many of the developers at Tandem that cool people use Vim, and I desire to be a cool people. So I have been trying to use Vim recently, and I am not very good at it. So I just want to let you know that before I begin. So here is a very basic example, very similar to the one that we were looking at earlier. Oops. So let's just try to replicate that a little bit. So the main difference between this one and the one that we had that I showed you on my screen earlier is this one is using our event recipe, which basically means to substitute Nginx for Apache. I'm a bigger Nginx fan, and by that I mean I'm more familiar with it. Apache is also a good solution. So we are going to specify our PHP version. We're going to do a little bit of customization. We're going to say just give me the latest version of MySQL. And we have this nice xdebug true flag, which will turn xdebug on for us. I will actually turn that off now because there's really no reason for us to have it. But it's good to be aware of that as a thing that you can do. And then there is also, oops. There is also this separate config section, which we didn't go over in the file that I showed you earlier. If you wanted to do the most basic Lando overrides for a recipe, but say you have your own Nginx config file or your own PHP ini file, and you really like them, you can use them. You can put them into your repository. You can say, hey Lando, like it's cool that you do this for me, but like I really like my php.ini that I've had since 1997. Can you like use that one? And Lando will use it for you. So that's good. We try to set sane defaults for all the things, but sane defaults is not a exhaustive and complete solution for all developers. One of the most common things that I've seen is my application is really big, and I need to bump my PHP memory limit to some insane number. I think that generally this reflects that you have a problem with your application, but Lando will compensate if you want it to. So I have, let us go to the command line. Oh, so all the things that I'm about to show you are actually in, this is another good shout out here. All the things that I'm going to show right now, if you go to the Lando GitHub page and you go to the examples directory, there are quite a few examples that you can look at. So if you think that this is really cool, but you're not exactly sure how to get started, I would definitely encourage you to go to this examples repository. There are very crazy things like here's like a hip hop virtual machine example. Here's an example that uses MailHub, which is one of the services that we have. And each one of these services actually has a README to it. So it'll have some interesting sort of commands that you can run to get spun up. So if you follow the README with the example, you should be able to spin the thing up, and you should be able to verify that it works. One of the other really nice things about this is, so testing Lando is a fun thing to do. So we have written our own testing layer for Lando specifically that actually is smart and will go through all of these examples and try to run these commands to verify that the application actually works the way that it does. So all the examples, this is not like these are examples that somebody wrote 2 years ago. These are examples that literally get tested every single time we push commits. So you can run these examples with a large degree of confidence that they're going to work. So I say that I say that in a way to highly encourage you to look at these as a starting point if you have not done this yet.
Hey, Mike?
Yes.
When you were saying you could go to that site and download Lando, do you have to have a subscription to Docker beforehand?
No, you should not. No, all of our stuff is free and open source and available, so you shouldn't need a Docker account or.
But Docker
like
might
that.
prompt you.
It's possible
for your login, but you don't need to do that.
Yeah, I'm running Docker right now here, and as far as I know, I am not logged into anything myself. I have seen I think there is a GitHub issue that is sort of the opposite of what you're describing, which is if you are logged into Docker, sometimes there are problems downloading stuff and you have to log out. I'm not exactly sure on the details of that, but there is an issue for that on GitHub. So if you're having that problem, I would look for that and see what the deal is there. But no, you should not need a subscription to anything. You should literally just be able to like download the release, install it, pick one of these examples, or spin up your own example, run Lando start, and get started. There are some common gatyas there are. If you're on a network that has like lots of ports locked down, it's possible that Lando will not be able to download containers. So behind the scenes, what Lando does is it connects to this thing called the Docker Hub, which, if you are familiar with, is a sort of open repository of many Docker images. So one of the things that we've decided is a good design decision is we try to use, so Docker maintains official images for many things. We try to use these official images as often as possible. It's not possible in all cases, but for the most part, you're using like the most vetted version of a container that exists, and they all come from this Docker Hub on the interwebs, which is good. So for example, like we build our PHP container has a little bit more than the default Docker one, but we use that one as a starting point. And as you can see, it has 10 million downloads, so a fairly vetted container. One of the nice things about Lando as well is if you don't like our image, you can actually swap it out and use your own. I would encourage you to not do that because I think it's a waste of time and stupid, but you certainly can do it if you wish to do it. So very, very flexible. If you are going to do that, or you're interested in shopping around for different images on the Docker Hub, I would definitely make sure that you, when you are doing that you check and make sure that that the image is generated from some sort of open source repository, where you actually see the commands that are being run to generate the image. There are many images on the Docker Hub that are essentially black boxes. They say, hey, this image does these things, but I will not tell you how I made this image. I will not tell you the things that are in this image. I'm just going to give you the image.
Is that the source repository block there?
Right, yeah. So you want to pick an image that has that source repository. It will link to the actual Git thing, so you can actually examine the commands that are used to build the image, the build process that they have, and verify that the image has the things in it that it says it does. The reason why I mention this is that there was a very popular image on the Docker Hub recently that had millions and millions and millions of downloads and actually was Bitcoin mining on people's computer. So be careful. So let's continue on the journey. So we were looking at this LEMP example. So we're going to start this up. And this is a very simple web application. I think it literally just prints PHP info. Super sophisticated application. So if we go into this directory, and I have already started this project, so let's go in and actually destroy it first, and then restart it. So I'm just going to blow it up, then I'm going to restart it, and we will have all the things that are in that config file, and this is good. So Lando start. And you can see one of the advantages of containers that you're probably already familiar with is it's very easy to destroy them and then spin them up again. So you can imagine doing this with like a Vagrant virtual machine. This process would probably take much longer. Luckily, it will not take as long for us, which is good. So we will start the service up. It is waiting, apparently, for the Nginx service to start. And when it does, hopefully we should have a Drupal app running. Or we should have just a normal LEMP stack running. That should not take that long. Actually. Sorry. What we want to do is let us, for less, I recently blew up my computer. So one of the things to know about Docker is that behind the scenes it downloads these images that I was just showing you from the Docker Hub. These images can sometimes be fairly large, and if you're on conference Wi-Fi, that might take quite a while. Once you have the images, they're cached. So the first time you run a Lando command, or really any Docker command, it might take quite a while for you to get those images, particularly for like more complicated applications. But once you have them, oops, no, I don't want to do that here. Once you have them, you do not need to download them again. So the first time you start a thing, it might take 2 minutes, 5 minutes, depending on how fast your internet is. The second time, it will take a couple of seconds. Question?
I think you meant to update the recipe.
Yeah, thank you. I did do that. So I'm just going to switch back to the lamp recipe, which should be less containers to get. And this will be a little bit confusing because we will have a lamp recipe named lemp, but as you know, one of the hardest problems in computer science is naming things, and we are here to demonstrate these problems. So let's destroy and recreate, and when we do, we should have a lamp stack. Oh, does it not? Is that correct? That looks correct. Ah, right. Sorry, I did not answer the prompt. It was wise and it asked me whether I was sure I wanted to destroy it, and I am sure that I wish to destroy it. One of the nice things that you can do is once you install Lando, you will actually have... oh, it looks like it did spin up those containers. Oh, I have another app running too. That's interesting. So if you are using Lando, it will install Docker for you automatically, which is nice. And if you're familiar with Docker things, you can go in and sort of like look in the back and see the things that are happening. So here's the Docker containers that are running. Very nice to see. So let us restart now. Oops. Lando start. And I'm going to pass in this extra like verbosity flag just so you can see all the crazy things that happen behind the scenes. Oh, no, apparently I don't have this image either. But you can see down here that's pulling this image, this PHP 7.2 Apache container from the Docker Hub. So I guess we will see how fast the internet is here. This container is like 500 megabytes. So who knows? Live demos are always fun. While we do that, or while we wait for that, maybe we will look at some other stuff really quickly. So I think one of the more interesting things about Lando is sort of the build and automation stuff that I was showing you earlier. So, well, actually, maybe we'll do that later. Let's jump into more of the slide deck. Oh, actually, this might be done. Oh, all right, the internet here is not too bad. So you can see that it took that time to make the thing. Let's actually destroy it and recreate it so you can see what it's like when you actually have the images pulled down, which is much faster. So I've destroyed it. I've already pulled the images. I will do a start. Actually, I don't think I need that flag. And you can see that it didn't have to download the things. It just did that really quickly. Waits for the database to actually be on, and then the app should start. Generally, this will take about 10 seconds. There we go. Here's our poorly named lemp.lando.site. And here's our application, which is just the PHP version. So this is good. We have the site running. There's a database. If we go into this thing and run Lando in the application, you'll see that we have a whole bunch of things that we can do. Some of the things are very familiar to you if you've used Vagrant or something like that. There's like start and stop and destroy and rebuild and all of these things. But you can see that Lando is smart. It sees this is a LAMP stack. So it says, I need to give this developer other tools, including Composer, these DB export and import commands, which are helpful if you want to import something into your database or export your database elsewhere. You can actually you can drop into the MySQL shell directly on the container. You can use PHP as a command line utility if you want to. There's this SSH command, so you can actually SSH into the container and hack around in it if you wish to. This is good if you are interested in customizing things a little bit. You can go in there and do it that way first. Once you do that, I would encourage you to take the results of that and put it into your Lando file so it's not sort of lost. But that's a good way to just get in there and sort of mess around. We also have this nifty Lando share command. which will basically say, we'll give you a publicly available URL for your site. So if I ran Lando share, I would get a URL, I could give the URL to Matt, and he could creepily look at what's on my computer. This is great if you want to like share things before you push them up to GitHub or elsewhere, or if you want to test your site on like a mobile device or something. So nice utility command there. All of these things are running inside of containers. So when I run Lando Composer, Composer is actually not installed on my host machine. It's installed inside of my container. And this is very nice. This means that I can take my computer, I can go to the bathroom, I can put it into the toilet, I can flush the toilet, I can destroy my computer, I can get another computer, I can git clone this site, and I'll have Composer and PHP and MySQL and all the tools that I need, and that's fine.
How long does the share persist for? Is there a way to like kill a URL?
I think if you run it, well, let's try it out. I think Lando share. I don't actually use this command very often, so I guess you need a host. So there's this nifty Lando info command that will give you sort of like metadata about your site, including helpful information about like URLs. So if you do like a Lando share, I think this is valid. I think it just opens a oh, that didn't work. So yeah, so you would run this command. It gives you a site. Sorry, I'm running a development version of Lando, so that's not working, which is unfortunate. But yeah, you'd run this command. And I think that it opens a process but doesn't close it, and then you can close it whenever you want to. And once you close it, then the site goes down. I don't know. If you keep it open, I don't know how long it persists. I think probably a decent amount of time for you to do something, but I don't think it's like days or anything like that. It's probably.
I mean, if you run Lando stop, it'll die. You have to share it again, right?
Oh yeah. So when you run the Lando share command, like this will open a process and it will not. The site will be available until you close it. So once you close the process, just like control out of it or hit enter or something, then it will go down. So let's explore some of these commands really quickly. So I mentioned that I can run Lando SSH. So this will drop me into my like app server container, which is what has PHP and all of those things. So this is just a Debian container. Most of our containers are Debian containers, by the way. We decided to do that instead of, a lot of people use Alpine as their sort of Docker thing because it's smaller. That's great, but we think that most people are familiar with Debian. It's like the most commonly used Linux distribution. So it's easier for people to SSH in and have that sort of experience. So that's why we're using Debian behind the scenes. And you can do all the Linux things now. I can download packages, I can do whatever. Very nice. But let us, and you can SSH into any container. By default, it'll SSH into like the tool that you're using. So that would be PHP in this case. It would be Ruby if you had a Ruby recipe. But I can also say SSH database, and now I'm actually inside of the database container. If I had this node service that we had in the other thing called CLI, I could do Lando SSH CLI. I would be inside of the node service. And if you're not sure what services you have, you can run this Lando info command, and it will tell you. So I just have two. I have a database, which is here, and I have an app server, which is there. Those are the two containers that I have for this. But if I ran Lando Composer, here's Composer. It's running in a container, as I mentioned. It is not on your host machine. This is very nice. It's good to have all your tools inside containers and all of your tech inside containers. Everything in containers. I can run Lando MySQL, and it will drop me into a MySQL shell that is in the container, which is nice. If you've ever tried to install MySQL on a Mac, it's sort of not the best thing in the world. So it's nice to just know that it's in a container, it has the version that I need, and I can just drop into a shell. I can run Lando destroy, and it goes away, which is good. Because very often on a Mac or a Linux machine, you install the thing, and then 3 years later, it's a huge problem. So it's good to be able to just sort of blow them up and spin them down and spin them up again. All very nice. If I run Lando PHP, I can see that it should be the same version as what's running on this. It's true, 7.2. So now I have my PHP version locked down. If I were to go into a different Lando project that had PHP 5.6, and run this command, it would give me 5.6 down there, not 7.2. So very nice. It's also very nice to manage the dependency versions that you need. And this is good because historically, it is not pleasant to try to do that on your host machine. You have to use some other utility. You have to remember to switch versions. Composer is very nasty about these requirements. It will yell at you if you have the wrong version. If you do it this way, you will not have to worry about that. You will just have the right version for your project all the time. And if you ever want to update the version, the file is in version control. It will get pushed somewhere like GitHub. There will be a pull request. Your team can discuss whether it is relevant to change the version or a good idea. And this is a good workflow. It is much better than somebody unilaterally being like, oh yeah, well it doesn't work because I decided to change the version of PHP on all of our stuff without telling anybody with no transparency. This is not good. This makes developers unhappy. And creates resentment in your team, which is also not good. So let us continue on our voyage. I'll spin up a very basic or more complicated example before I move on to other stuff. So let us take, let us make a more complicated example. So let us say that beyond just this, I desire to have a, like we were talking about before, a CLI container. That is running, oops. It's important to remember your own config system. So CLI, and we want to give it type, let's just say, I think that node 10 is the LTS version of node, so let's use that. That seems like a good idea. And we don't want to install task runners because we think those are lame. So let's just install a node container. That will be good. We're doing SAS compilation or something. We want to like install our node dependencies. So we also need node for our site. Let's also do some other things. So if you use one of the Lando recipes, which I highly recommend that you do, it will define these services for you out of the box. And it will define your PHP version or your code thing as a container called app server, and it will define whatever your database choice is as a service called database. So by default, those are things that you should know. There's always going to be an app server container. If you use a recipe, it's always going to be a database container, which means that I can actually go in here and say, I want to change things about my app server. I want to add some extra stuff. Lando, as I mentioned before, I think has really good documentation. So let's say that I want to be a very sort of Gestapo-ish director of engineering, and I've decided that I think Vim, all people should use Vim, and I should ship Vim as a dependency in Lando, and people should use Vim in Lando, which, by the way, is a horrible idea, but it's something that is possible and demonstrative of the kinds of things that you can do. So I'm going to go here and look for advanced usage. I'm going to notice that there is this section called build steps. I'm going to see that I can use this install dependencies as root command to add extra packages to my service. A great use case for this that is not Vim is PHP extensions are sort of a difficult thing to manage sometimes. We've tried to include most of the ones that people use, but there are always ones that other people need. And we are not going to ship a container that has every PHP extension in it because this will take the rest of your life to download. So if you have a special PHP extension that you need, you can use this nifty install dependencies as root command and just straight up run the Linux commands that you need to install that extension. When you start the container, Lando will run those commands for you. Then your container will start with the extra extensions installed. If you go to our documentation and look at the PHP service, it will list all the extensions that we have. So you should start from there. So we will just do apt get, I guess, update. And then we will do apt get install Vim. And then Lando has this nifty, so you noticed before that we had, well, actually, let me start this first. Oops, I keep doing that. So we can go, oh, sorry, I see. So once you change the config file, you want to run this Lando rebuild command. That will essentially execute all the things that you have written in your file. So we're going to do Lando rebuild. What should happen when we do this is that Lando will destroy the containers that we have. It will recreate them. It'll also add a Node 10 container for us, and it will also install Vim inside of our app server for us. So we can watch this happen in real time. But while it's doing that, maybe let's be more productive with a little amount of time that we have left to blow through some other interesting things about Lando that are relevant to the devs. Oops, no, I don't want to share it. I should present it. So we have just done a very basic lamp stack here. There is a Drupal recipe, so you can replace lamp in there with just Drupal 7 or Drupal 6. It will give you, by default, the best recommendations for that. So being able to run, beyond being able to run Lando Composer, you can run Lando Drush. You can run Lando WP CLI if you choose the WordPress recipe. So you'll get these tools sort of tailored to each thing, which is good. Yeah, so these are the core things that you can sort of edit in the Drupal recipe that are very similar to the things you can edit in the LAMP recipe. You can choose Apache or Nginx. You can choose your PHP version. You can turn Xdebug on or off. You can add custom config files. You can pick your database backend. And you'll get sort of the common tools. Drush, the recommended Drush for the version of Drupal that you're using. Drupal console will come for Drupal 8. So you'll get a sort of good mix right out of the box, which is nice. If you look at the slide deck afterwards, you could run these commands. It will spin up a Drupal site for you, a vanilla Drupal 7 site. Yeah, as I mentioned before, we saw these commands earlier. These are sort of commands that you can run. Yeah, I also mentioned that we have this nice integration with Pantheon. I'm not going to go into this in super great detail. But basically all that you need to sort of make the magic happen is you need a site on Pantheon to begin with. This is important. And you need a Pantheon machine token, which is the way they sort of authenticate you as a user. If you have those two things and you have Lando, then you can get a site running on your computer with Lando. Lando will basically emulate the entire Pantheon stack. I actually emailed David Strauss and I was like, hey man, can you give me the Varnish config file for Pantheon? And he was like, sure, no big deal. So we use 3 months old at this point, but like basically the config versions that they have for Pantheon are what you use locally for Lando. So this is the closest facsimile that you can get to running Pantheon. This is very good because Pantheon has made a lot of decisions about how their platform works. Some of them are interesting, and they might be surprising to you if you go from dev to live and your site breaks. It's nice to be able to test those on your local first and have the same sort of experience. In addition to, so the Pantheon recipe is built on top of our Drupal recipe, which means that you'll also get Drush, you'll also get Composer. We will also add in a Lando Terminus command. Terminus is Pantheon's command line utility. We will add the Redis CLI. Pantheon uses Redis as its sort of caching layer, its key value store. So you can use the Redis CLI. You can run Lando Redis CLI and do Redis things if you like to do Redis things. Pantheon has this pantheon.yaml file, which specifies its PHP version and whether you have a nested doc root or not. Lando is smart. It will see that you have a Pantheon YAML file. It will look at the PHP version in the Pantheon YAML file and it will use that version. This is good because then you have to only maintain one config file that determines sort of what your Pantheon site looks like instead of the Pantheon config file and the Lando config file. This is good because there are definitely use cases where someone will remember to update one of the files and not the other file. So in this case, there's just one file that you have to edit. It has very nice utility commands like Lando push and Lando pull. Lando pull will basically take all the stuff that you have running on your Pantheon site and pull it down to your local site. That means your code, that means your database, that means your files. Push will do the opposite. You can push your code back up to Pantheon. If you're someone who likes to push databases around, one, shame on you. But two, you can do that with Lando. This is nice if you're starting a project to begin with. You can actually push your database locally up to Pantheon and then go through their sort of deployment workflow. There's also this nifty, so Pantheon multi-dev is a great feature. You can get these sort of branches, sites spun up for these different Git branches. Lando has a nice Lando switch utility command that will bounce you between the multi-dev environments. So very easy to get running with a Pantheon site. You can just do Lando init. Pantheon is the command that you would run. We also have integration with GitHub. So if you're somebody who likes to use Pantheon but has their code in GitHub, you can do this nifty command, Lando init GitHub recipe Pantheon, which basically says, hey, authenticate me with GitHub. Let me select a site from GitHub and then instantiate it as a Pantheon site. So what that would do is it would not pull your code from Pantheon, it would pull it from GitHub. So you can do sort of interesting things. Now let's bounce back. We can see that our site has completed. We can see that I have 9 minutes left. So that's not too bad. So if I run Lando info, I should now see that I have, well, I can see actually, I can see that I now have this other container down here called CLI running node 10. You mentioned actually the host names earlier. If you run Lando info, you can get the host names, database.lemp.internal. Those are host names that are only inside of the container, so only the containers know about them. If I type that into my browser, it's not going to know what that is. They're internal host names. So this is great. Now I have a node container running. That's awesome. But how do I access the thing? So I have a node container running. I also have Vim running. If we scroll back up, we can see these familiar apt-get Linuxy commands. You can see that I installed Vim as my editor. These are all inside of containers. This is very good. So we have our things locally. How do we access them easy with Lando? Lando has a thing called tooling. This allows us to define custom commands that route Lando some command to some command inside of a container. They're fairly easy to set up. Let us set up a few of them. So let's bounce over to my host machine, Vim. We were looking at, which one were we doing? It was lemp. That's right, because it was confusing. So let's bounce in here. You can define this key called tooling. No, Vim. Not there. And I can say, I want to create a command called Lando node, because I have node inside of a container. And let me make sure that the syntax for this is correct. If you go to the documentation, there's a whole section on tooling. You can do very crazy things with tooling, actually. I could define a Lando test command and say, run command A inside of this container, run command B inside of this container, run command C inside of this container. So you can use this tooling command or tooling routing to do things like Lando node or Lando npm or Lando vim, which is what we're going to show, but you can also sort of chain commands together. And this becomes very nice. In my training yesterday, I said that we use Lando in Travis CI because it's identical to our local setup. And all of our Travis CI files look exactly the same. They install the Linux version of Lando. They run Lando start. They run Lando test. That file is the same for every project that we have, regardless of what the tech stack is or what the project is. And the reason why that's possible is because we're basically telling Travis to delegate all the heavy lifting to Lando. It's going to do exactly what we're doing locally. And this is great because now you have one config file that does two things. Anyway, so back to tooling. We want to do something like this. We've defined a node command. I can tell it what service it's in. It's in a service called CLI. I think by default... Oh, god damn it. Sorry, I told you I was bad with Vim. Service CLI. Let's say we also want to use yarn, which comes with the node container. Let's say we also want to use npm, because we're testing them out. Which one's better, npm, yarn? The answer is yarn, by the way. But we're going to test them out, so we want to use both of them. Oops. And we also want to look at Vim, which we installed in our app server container. Service. App server. So when I save this file and go back to my thing here, now when I run Lando, I should see some extra things, which I do. Yarn, Vim, node, npm, the things that I just defined. So now I can run these things, Lando Vim, Lando Yarn, Lando all the things. So if I run Lando node v, sorry, that's down on the screen. You can see I installed node 10, so I expect to see node 10. There it is. I am now running node inside of my container via Lando node. If I had a package.json in this repository, I could now run Lando npm install. I could run Lando yarn. I have dependency management. Local dev dependency management is happening. If I wanted to access my text editor inside of my container, I can run Lando Vim. Here I am, inside of Vim, inside of a container. This is not the best idea, but just to show you what is possible. Oops, quit. You can also, so if you are a DevOps engineer or director of engineering type person and you don't like your team, you can play nasty tricks on them. So I can do something like this. Let's define a command called node, but let's actually say that, let's say that it's node, but let's actually say that it's PHP. So now what I can do is I should be able to run Lando node, and so this, if this were accurate, this would give me the node version. However, because I'm a dick, this will give me the PHP. Oh, sorry.
Did you hit the red button?
Oh, yeah.
Censor.
Sorry. Let me go back and read my own thing here.
Start it.
Oh,
You need to restart it.
Restart or rebuild.
no, I named the key is actually not command, it's CMD. This is why documentation is good. Okay. PHP version. So you can do very fun, clever things to annoy your developers. Yes.
So I actually use that to do things like run Lando update, like import configuration, run the cache, compile these.
Yep.
So you can use it for things like that.
Yep. So you can also do complicated stuff. Like say I want to define like I was mentioning before, like a test command. I can actually this command thing actually accepts an array, and I can prefix the array with containers. So I can say, hey, like command 1 in the app server, maybe run Behat. In command 2, use the node service and run yarn test. So you can chain all these commands together in different applications, and that's very powerful. So I'm at the end of my time. Does anyone have, I'm sorry that I cannot continue with more stuff, but I hope this gave you a good idea of the things that are possible with Lando. There is much more than what I have showcased. I would encourage you to read the documentation to see what else is available. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the next 60 seconds.
I'll throw out a quick question.
Yes.
So documentation appears still to be evolving. Is there an upcoming kind of push to get some of the pieces in that aren't there?
Can you be more specific?
Well, just for example, I think a couple of us got blocked on figuring out some of the tooling stuff. I think like the Node, the documentation on Node had a couple of things that seemed inconsistent, and I'm pretty sure one of my team filed a bug on GitHub, so I can look that up and send it to you if you want.
Yeah, that'd be good. So our documentation, so there is a lot of documentation. Lando is like a project that's still developed, there's no stable release yet. So there definitely are things in documentation that are probably no longer accurate. I would say that the vast majority of the documentation is accurate. I think it's actually one of the best things that Lando offers is the documentation. There's a lot of documentation. If you do find something that you think is inaccurate, please open a ticket. Documentation is very easy to update. There are many people in the Lando community that update the docs for us. So if you feel inclined to just open a pull request with whatever you think the change should be, feel free to do that. That would be super helpful. Yeah, no, I'm sorry that you had a bad experience with it, but generally the documentation is pretty good. I would recommend that you use it and read it. But like all things open source, things evolve, things change.
Are the docs a project? Can you update the docs? Or
Yeah. So great question. So if you go to the Lando repo, the whole docs site is actually generated from this repository as well. There is this docs folder, and this is all the docs are in Markdown files, and they're all in here. So if I think we were just looking at that tooling section, that's like, oh, I guess not in there. But let's just say we're looking at the Drupal 7. So here's all the Drupal 7 stuff in a Markdown file. And you can be super lazy about it. You can just go to GitHub and you can actually use their editor and just make the change, commit it that way. You don't even have to pull it down. Any other questions really quick? Great, well, thank you very much for coming. I will be around for the rest of the day. So if you have other questions, if you think of a question and you regret not asking it, I will be around so you can ask it. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their time here in Providence, Rhode Island.
Thanks, Mike.